I never felt sort of a more profound sense of this person gets it and she really cares, in my life. And ultimately she turned out to be right. But 20 years later, I think about that conversation as you don't have to give in to make another person feel profoundly heard.
Hey, it's Julie. Welcome to Uncomfy. A lot of us are struggling right now with how to stay open to others when we seem to be living in different realities, seeing the world completely differently. I feel like I'm always walking on eggshells with people, but I also don't want to give up on connection. This is a podcast about staying with the moments we usually want to escape, the awkward ones, the tense ones, honestly, the ones that can actually teach us something. So let's get uncomfy.
I feel sort of heat rising, and I think it's sort of heat of embarrassment and anger combined together because I'm annoyed at the other person, but I'm also embarrassed that I'm not, like, maybe I'm the one who doesn't get it.
Friends, I want you to meet Julia Minson. She's a professor of public policy at the Harvard Kennedy School of Government, and she has a new book called How to Disagree Better. Disagreeing better is her entire academic pursuit, and she's got some stories to tell. Professor Minson, welcome. It's so great to have you.
Thanks so much, Julie. It's great to be here.
All right, tell us about the specific disagreement the uncomfy disagreement you were just visualizing as you were describing your sensations.
So, I have a long history with disagreement, and many of those disagreements are with the same person. My husband and I have been married for 25 years, and before we were married, we were dance partners together. And so for years and years and years, we were competitive ballroom dancers.
And you still dance together? Is that...
So we took a long 20-year break as we had 3 children. And just recently, we have kind of come back to, wanting to have a hobby that is, something we can do together. So now we sort of dance in our kitchen with the laptop on the kitchen table. It's a lot less serious, but that's, we're trying to get back to it.
Yeah. Can you describe what is this recent sort of dancing disagreement that you've had?
With dancing, part of the reason why I started doing this research is because this tension that on one hand you think like, well, you have to, reach consensus in order to go anywhere. But on the other hand, dancers fight all the time. And the reason they fight all the time is because they literally see the world from different perspectives. So, you are facing each other, which means you're actually looking in opposite directions. And when you're trying to learn something, if you are like in a large dance studio, there's mirrors on the walls, you see each other's reflections and you see opposite things. In our current life where we're dancing in our kitchen, we just had a disagreement that went on for 10, 15 minutes where we were looking at a video. We're looking at the same video of a couple. We're trying to learn a new, West Coast swing pattern. And my husband is absolutely certain that, the woman is rotating, past the man's right shoulder. And I'm absolutely certain that she's rotating past his left. And we're just like baffled that the other person doesn't see it the right way. And bafflement very quickly gives way to frustration because it feels like, well, you're just not paying attention. Stop looking at the dog, stop looking out the window, like look at this video, try again, try harder. And it's just amazing to me that we can still have these experiences as long as we've been doing this.
So how did you resolve the left shoulder, right shoulder? Who was right when it came to the YouTube video?
He was right. Infuriatingly, he was right. And the only thing I can really give myself credit for is that it never became a conflict. And I draw sort of a distinction between disagreement and conflict where, disagreement is just you see it this way and I see it that way, or I prefer this and you prefer that. And people can have completely like sensible, interesting, fun conversations when they happen to disagree. Conflict is when you just cannot abide the other person believing what they believe, right? You have to change their mind either because they're dead wrong or because you feel like their view is in some way sort of antithetical to your values or your morals. And so I've thought for a long time about the phrase constructive disagreement. Constructive is aspirational, right? We're trying to construct something. And I thought, well, what are we trying to construct? And what I landed on is we're trying to construct a bridge to the next conversation. We don't have to change our mind. We don't have to compromise. You don't actually have to figure out who was right and who was wrong and which way, the person was spinning in that video. What you have to do is leave the conversation in a way that makes you want to do it again. And so it could be like, oh, you said something interesting and I want to follow up with you on that thing you said. I'm curious to learn more, right? Or I still don't understand how this works. Let's look at this video again. Or I remembered this other thing that I wanted to say last time we spoke. Can I tell you about this experience I've had? And all of those are sort of entry points into a future conversation that you wouldn't have available to you if you kind of set the relationship on fire.
So I love how in the book you described that. I mean, you alluded to it, but this apparently was really truly the case, that all these disagreements with your dance partner / soon-to-be husband were like a major inspiration for wanting to study disagreement. You land at Stanford, I think it was, right? Like under the tutelage of like a world famous disagreement guy.
Lee Ross.
Okay.
So it was fascinating, right? Because I studied psychology in college and I traveled around the country and met with professors at different universities. And some of them clearly thought that my idea of studying ballroom dancers was laughable, And then I met Lee, and he was one of the most famous, influential social psychologists, alive at the time. He studied the Northern Ireland conflict. He studied the Middle East conflict, but his brother happened to be a ballet dancer. And so when I showed up in his office and I said, I want to study ballroom dancers, he said, oh, yeah, I get it. Like, I've talked to my brother about this and this is so interesting. And we just sort of really connected.
What was one of the first things that you discovered that you had misunderstood about disagreement?
To me, the big aha in graduate school that really sort of spurned the rest of the work was drawing a distinction between being receptive to an opposing perspective and being willing to be persuaded by it. There is a way to have a disagreement where persuasion is just not on the table, and we still need to talk to each other. And some people seem to kind of be good at it. And this is where Lee's research was sort of an inspiration to me. So naive realism is his term for this mindset we have of, I see the world in like a rational, objective, reasonable way. And so I get it. And therefore you kind of need to agree with me. And so to me, the thing that really spoke to me in graduate school was, who are these people who can stay in a dialogue even when they know that nobody's mind is going to change? And how do we create more of it in the world? Because there's a lot of contexts like that where nobody will ever change their mind, but we still need to talk to each other.
Yeah. Have you had an experience where someone has demonstrated that, or where you felt that worked?
Yeah, so probably the most vivid experience in my personal life that really kind of captured that was during graduate school. My mom got diagnosed with lung cancer. She was treated at the Stanford Medical Center, one of the top cancer centers in the world. And at some point we learned that the cancer had metastasized to her brain, which is, basically a death sentence at that point. But there was a new medication that had just come out, and it was a medication, actually, I think initially produced for kidney cancer. It was called Avastin. The way it works is it looks for entities in the body that are drawing a lot of blood. And so it cuts off the blood supply to the tumors, and then the tumor sort of doesn't get its resources and shrinks. And so Avastin was getting a lot of play in the media, and doctors were prescribing it off label for other types of cancer, not just kidney cancer. And so I went to my mom's doctor and I said, can we please, 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 try Avastin? And she said, no, we can't, because when a cancer has metastasized to the brain, if you put a person on that kind of medication, then you'll get a brain bleed. And so then she will have essentially a stroke, right? And I said, well, she doesn't have metastases in her brain anymore because she had radiation. And the doctor said, well, no, because there could be some in there that we can't see on imaging because they're too tiny. And I begged and I pleaded, and she still said no.
Yeah, you must have felt, I guess, angry, frustrated.
Yeah,
afraid,
angry,
kind of all those
frustrated,
things.
devastated, right? And she, and the way she said no, she also said, look, she said, I could lose my medical license. I could go to prison if I essentially kill your mother by giving her a drug that is definitely not indicated for this condition. And so we came back a couple of weeks later, and she said, we have this meeting of cancer, physicians from several different medical centers where they get together and they discuss the toughest cases. And she said, I presented your idea and we discussed it. And they just all think that it's a non-starter. It is way too risky. There's just no way that we can do this. And the thing that blew me away, she had already said no before, right? She had, in a sense, won the argument, right?
Or shut it down.
Shut
how
it
dare
down.
you? I could get, I could lose my license. This is not happening. Thank you.
Right.
Very much.
One of the top oncologists, in that sort of field, in that specialty in the world.
Yeah.
And here's me, a 25-year-old grad student in psychology, right? But she didn't just sort of ignore it and put it out of her mind. She demonstrated with her behavior that she wanted to engage with the idea, right? And she engaged with it by putting it out there, really sort of chewing on it, having other people chew on it. And I never felt sort of a more profound sense of this person gets it and she really cares, in my life. And ultimately, she turned out to be right. So, my mom died, and what she died of was the metastases in her brain that we couldn't see on imaging. But 20 years later, I think about that conversation as, you don't have to give in to make another person feel profoundly heard.
Oh, that's the skill then, right? Of, in disagreement, ensuring that the other person feels heard.
Yes.
And
yes.
also ideally feeling heard yourself, right? I guess that's the ideal scenario, but I can only control what I do in a disagreement. And so the goal then, because I know you have kind of a framework for this, because another interesting thing that you discovered, Professor Minson, is that we think when we are being receptive, when we're doing this really hard thing for a lot of us, hearing, listening, being open to, trying to affirm, it doesn't always read that way. People aren't always picking up our signals. So would you talk a little bit about the framework that you've developed to help us be heard, and also assure that we're helping the other person understand our receptivity?
Yeah. I have a former graduate student who is a professor at UCLA now. And she has this great phrase, and I almost named the book this. Her phrase is, listen with your mouth. which means that you have to show you're listening with your words. You have to figure out how to communicate your engagement with the other side using words that they can hear, that they can accurately interpret. And so this is what we call conversational receptiveness. So the way we develop this framework is you basically run studies where you pair people up who dramatically disagree on things, and they talk. And then once you have all these transcripts, you have other people read the transcripts and rate how receptive a person seems. And so then what you do is you use machine learning to essentially sift through all the text and say, what are the words and phrases said by the people who were rated as the most receptive? And what are the words and phrases that are said by the people who are rated as the least receptive? And so this is what we kind of came to jokingly call the receptiveness recipe, because it is just like a clear guide to, say this, don't say that. And there's a lot of them. So in order to make it a little bit easier to teach and make it more useful to folks, we came up with an acronym to remember the key points. And so the acronym is HEAR, as in I hear you. The H in here stands for hedging your claims. So it's phrases like sometimes, possibly, maybe. The idea is that although we want to be very direct and clear and sound certain in disagreement, if you add a little bit of a hedge, it decreases your counterpart's desire to argue with you, because you have already demonstrated verbally that you get you get the fact that there's an opposing perspective, right? So I could say, COVID vaccines are safe and effective, right? And that's a true statement that I, believe. And I could also say most physicians tend to believe that COVID vaccines are largely safe and effective. So I have just shoved 3 hedges into one sentence, which is a lot. And that really makes my counterpart, it sort of showcases to my counterpart that I am aware of, all the exceptions, right? And all the nuance. The E in here stands for emphasizing agreement. So, just like Dr. Jacobs never came around to agree with me about Avastin, you don't have to agree, you don't have to compromise, but you can say things that highlight the fact that we're on the same side and we share some values, right? So you could say, I agree that our teachers work incredibly hard. Or we both want to live in a country where everyone feels safe and respected. Or I am also interested in figuring out how to complete this project under budget. So these are all ways of saying, look, we're on the same team. We're trying to do this together. The A in here stands for acknowledgement. It's basically saying, look, before you jump into your argument, take a few seconds to verbally demonstrate to the other person that you have been listening while they were speaking. And so it could be something like, I understand that you're really concerned with how much time our daughter is spending online. And you have read a lot of research about, the risks of social media for teenage girls. But I also think that there's a difference between, spending time on social media versus, spending time on Google Classroom. Not all screens are the same. So I just made an argument for how, not all screens are the same, but I acknowledged my counterpart's concern and I showed that I heard it. The R stands for reframing to the positive. So it kind of does double duty by dropping some of the contradictory and negatively valenced words. So no, can't, won't, don't, terrible, hate. Surprisingly how often terrible and hate come up in conversation, and replacing them with some more positively valenced words, right? Great, wonderful, appreciate. So I could say, I hate it when people force me to rush into stressful decisions. Or I could say, I really appreciate it when people give me the time to think through important decisions. And, in both cases, what I'm saying is, please give me more time. I need to think harder. But the tone is different and gives me a chance to say the same thing without introducing so much negativity into the conversation.
Yeah. Well, that's a great framework. I thank you for that. That's really helpful. If I could just maybe just ask you finally to be a little personal, is one of those particularly challenging for you?
I think the R, the positivity,
the reframing,
the reframing. I'm quite sarcastic and I'm quite direct, and so I often have to edit myself in my own head.
Oh, gosh, I wish I were better at editing myself in my own head. I can really relate to that.
I think, and that's a really interesting point that people sometimes bring up when I teach this framework is, in the beginning, there's this concern of, am I not being authentic?
Yeah.
Am I not sort of coming across the way I want to come across?
So I just have to be a doormat who doesn't actually express myself, right? Because that can't feel good either, or at least not feel satisfying.
Right. And, and what I like to sort of remind folks is that anything we want to get good at, we have to practice. So the first time you maybe, if you've ever played music, right, the first time you play it, it feels super stumbly and awkward and you make a lot of mistakes. And nobody says, well, you're being inauthentic by taking lessons and reading the sheet music, right? They say, good job trying, now go try again. And so receptiveness and expressing yourself with receptiveness is the same. It takes a bit of time to get comfortable at it, and then it makes your life easier because having a constructive disagreement is so much more pleasant than sort of flying off the handle authentically. That over time it really pays dividends.
Wow, there's some things I'm really excited to try. Thank you so much for sharing these insights with us. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Julie.
Julia Minson's new book is How to Disagree Better, and it really is a great read. She's a professor of public policy at the Harvard Kennedy School of Government. And thank you for getting uncomfy with us today. Disagreement is one of the most uncomfy things in my life that I experience, especially heated disagreement. And I loved the idea of the goal of a disagreement being not to win it or resolve it or move on from it, but actually to build a bridge to another conversation. That's not the way I typically think about disagreement. So I'm going to be chewing on that one for a while. And it really makes a lot of sense, especially when so many of our disagreements are with people in our household or in our workplace or who share the pews with us at church, right? Or who live next door. Obviously, we need to stay in relationship. And I think my tendency is to want to kind of like, oh, I disagreed with that person. Gotta shrink my world a little smaller so that I don't have to encounter disagreement with people. I'd love to hear what you think. Email uncomfy@byu.edu or find us on social media. We are at uncomfy.podcast on Instagram. Uncomfy is a BYU radio podcast. Samuel Benson produces it, and the team includes Hyopin Kim and Sam Payne. Our theme music was composed by Kelsey Ney. I'm Julie Rose. Can't wait to get uncomfy with you again next week. Before I leave you, I want to recommend another show from the BYU Radio family of podcasts that I'm pretty sure you're going to love. It's called Constant Wonder, and it consistently, or should I say constantly, ranks near the top of Apple's nature podcasts in their rankings. But Constant Wonder is about more than just nature. It's about finding awe in everything around us, including our own backyards. So on the show, you'll hear guests share stories of spiritual encounters with nature, of real-life accounts of human kindness and bravery, like a doctor on a quest to bring care to the homeless. See the world with new eyes as host Marcus Smith invites us to find wonder in every corner of life. Listen to new episodes of Constant Wonder every Wednesday on the BYU Radio app or wherever you listen to podcasts.